This story begins on what seemed like just another ordinary day in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood where the only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the occasional bark of a dog. It was the kind of place where people felt safe, where the world's chaos seemed far away. The sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow over neatly trimmed lawns. Children laughed as they played on the sidewalks, and neighbors exchanged cheerful greetings as they passed each other on their morning routines. Among them was Mary, a kind-hearted 60-year-old woman enjoying her usual stroll home after a quick trip to the grocery store. She carried a canvas bag filled with fresh produce, humming softly to herself, blissfully unaware that just a few blocks away, a shadow was lurking. But this day wasn't going to stay ordinary. Something was about to happen, something that would shake this peaceful street to its core and leave everyone asking, how could this happen here? What starts as a simple act of malice will turn into a moment of incredible bravery and unexpected redemption. A split-second decision will change lives forever, and the ending? Well, it's something you'll have to see to believe. This is a story of fear, courage, and the astonishing power of kindness to heal even the deepest wounds. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will leave you stunned and inspired, proving that even the darkest moments can lead to light. Mary hummed a familiar tune as she strolled down the quiet, tree-lined street, a canvas bag of groceries tucked securely under her arm. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and the neighborhood felt alive with small, comforting noises. The faint laughter of children playing, the distant hum of a lawnmower, and the cheerful chirping of birds overhead. She paused briefly to wave at her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who was tending to her garden across the street. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mary?" Mrs. Henderson called out, brushing some dirt off her hands. "Couldn't be better," Mary replied with a warm smile. Everything about the day seemed peaceful, normal, safe. Mary had lived in this neighborhood for decades. She knew every face, every crack in the sidewalk, every story behind the houses that lined the street. It was home, and she loved the sense of security it gave her. But as Mary adjusted the strap of her bag and continued her walk, she didn't notice the faint hum of bicycle tires coming from the far end of the street. Not yet. The man on the bike appeared to be in his 20s, wearing a faded hoodie pulled low over his face. His hands gripped the handlebars tightly, and his eyes darted from side to side, as if scanning the area for something, or someone. He moved slowly, deliberately, staying just out of sight as Mary turned the corner. Mary stopped in front of a small park to adjust her shoe. A young boy zipped past her on his own bike, laughing as he tried to keep up with his father, jogging behind him. Mary smiled warmly at the sight, her heart swelling with memories of her own children when they were little. She didn't notice the hooded biker who had stopped just a few feet away, watching her intently. There was nothing remarkable about Mary's appearance that day. She wore a simple cardigan and slacks, her short silver hair combed neatly. But to the man on the bike, she was the perfect target. As Mary crossed another intersection, she shifted her bag to her other arm and tightened her grip. It was a small, thoughtful gesture she made without even realizing it, a sign of someone who still held on to her sense of awareness despite the years. But she didn't hear the bike start moving again, rolling quietly like a shadow behind her. When Mary finally noticed something was off, it was too late. The first thing she heard was the sudden rush of wheels behind her, fast and loud. Instinctively, she turned her head, but before she could react, the biker was there, so close she could feel the air shift around her. The man reached out with one hand and grabbed the strap of her bag, yanking it hard. "No!" Mary cried out, holding on as tightly as she could. But the force of the pull was too strong, and the sudden motion knocked her off balance. She stumbled, her foot catching on the curb, and fell to the ground with a sharp gasp. Her bag hit the sidewalk, spilling oranges, a loaf of bread, and a carton of eggs, which shattered on impact. The biker didn't even pause. He sped off, clutching her purse in one hand, his wheels squealing as he rounded the next corner. Mary lay there for a moment, stunned. Pain shot through her knees and palms, scraped raw from the fall. But it wasn't the pain that brought tears to her eyes. It was the shock, the violation, the cruel reality that someone could attack her in broad daylight in her own neighborhood. "Help!" she called out weakly, her voice trembling. "Someone! Please! Help!" Across the street, a few bystanders froze, unsure of what to do, but one man didn't hesitate. Sitting in a parked car just a few yards away, James had seen the entire thing unfold. He'd been watching Mary, his gaze drifting as he sipped his coffee, when the biker first appeared. At first, James thought the guy was just another passerby, but something about the way he moved, the way his eyes scanned Mary like a predator watching its prey, made James sit up a little straighter. Now, as he saw Mary on the ground and the biker disappearing down the street, James felt his heart pound. He slammed his coffee cup into the holder and threw open the car door. "Hang on!" he shouted to Mary as he sprinted toward her. "I'll get him!" Mary looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his for a brief moment. James didn't wait for her to respond. He was already running back to his car, his mind racing as fast as his heartbeat. The biker had no idea what was coming. James leaped into his car, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he started the engine. He clenched the steering wheel tightly, his eyes locking onto the distant figure of the biker weaving through the neighborhood streets. The tires screeched as he sped off, his focus razor-sharp. "He's not getting away with this," James muttered under his breath, his voice firm and filled with resolve. The quiet neighborhood was now filled with the hum of his engine as James followed the biker. He kept a safe distance, his years of military training kicking in. He didn't want to spook the guy, not yet. For now, he needed to stay close, wait for the right moment to act. The biker darted down a narrow side street, glancing over his shoulder briefly. James instinctively slowed down, his car blending into the background as if he were just another driver passing through. He noticed the young man's erratic movements, constantly looking behind him, gripping the stolen purse tightly. This isn't just some thrill-seeker, James thought. This guy's desperate. The chase led them deeper into the neighborhood, away from the main streets and into a more secluded area lined with old warehouses and overgrown lots. James's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. What would he do when he caught up? Was this guy armed? Dangerous? He pushed those thoughts aside. Mary's terrified face was etched into his memory, and that was all the motivation he needed. As the biker rounded another corner, he suddenly slowed down, pulling into a dimly lit alley behind a row of abandoned buildings. James eased off the gas, parking a safe distance away. He turned off his headlights, relying on the faint glow of the streetlights to keep him hidden. He sat there for a moment, watching. The young man dismounted the bike and quickly crouched down, rifling through Mary's purse with shaky hands. He pulled out a wallet, a set of keys, and a few other items, tossing them onto the ground as though they were useless to him. His breathing was heavy. Even from this distance, James could see the tension in his body language. James grabbed his phone and quietly dialed 911. "This is James Carter. I'm in pursuit of a robbery suspect. He's on foot now behind the warehouses on Cedar Street. I've got eyes on him," he whispered into the phone. The dispatcher assured him that officers were on the way, but James wasn't about to just sit there. He slid his phone into his pocket, his military instincts urging him to act. James stepped out of his car, moving quietly, his shoes crunching softly on the gravel. The biker was so focused on the contents of the purse that he didn't hear him approach. James stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but commanding. "Hey!" The young man froze, his entire body tensing as he whipped around to face James. For a moment their eyes met, one pair filled with fear, the other with determination. "You don't have to do this," James said, his tone steady but firm. "It's not too late to make this right." The young man backed up, clutching the purse tightly against his chest. His eyes darted around looking for an escape route, but James didn't move. He kept his stance neutral, non-threatening, his hands slightly raised. "Who are you?" the young man demanded, his voice shaking. "I'm someone who saw what you did," James replied. "And I know you're scared, but stealing from an innocent woman isn't the answer. Just give me the purse and we'll figure this out." The young man shook his head violently. "You don't understand. I don't have a choice. I've got nothing, no job, no food. No one cares about me." James took a small step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I care. That's why I'm here. You don't want to go down this path. Trust me, it doesn't lead anywhere good." The young man's grip on the purse loosened slightly. His breathing was ragged, his face a mix of defiance and desperation. "You don't know what it's like," he muttered, his voice cracking, "to feel invisible, like you don't matter." James nodded. "You're right. I don't know your story, but I do know you don't have to let this moment define you. Hand me the purse, and we'll talk. I'll help you, but you've got to trust me." The young man hesitated, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the purse strap. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he finally let go, dropping the purse onto the ground. James picked it up carefully, his eyes never leaving the young man's. He could see the tears welling up in his eyes, the weight of his actions starting to sink in. "You did the right thing," James said softly. The faint sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The young man looked panicked, but James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay here," he said. "We'll figure this out together." The young man nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time, he looked less like a criminal and more like a scared kid who had lost his way. As the wail of sirens drew closer, the young man fidgeted, his hands twitching at his sides. James stood beside him, calm but firm, his presence steady and unwavering. The tension in the air was palpable, the narrow alleyway now feeling smaller as the weight of the situation pressed down on both of them. "They're coming to take me away," the young man said in a low voice, his head hanging. "I'm done for." James shook his head, meeting the boy's gaze with an intensity that demanded attention. "You're not done. Not unless you give up on yourself. You've already taken the first step by stopping and listening. That counts for something." The young man blinked, his expression flickering with confusion. He wasn't used to someone speaking to him like this, not with anger, not with judgment, but with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the alley as the police car finally arrived. Two officers stepped out, their movements brisk and efficient. One approached James, while the other kept an eye on the young man, hand hovering near his holster. "Are you James Carter?" the first officer asked, glancing from James to the young man. "I am," James said, his voice steady. "This is the guy you're looking for, but listen. I've talked to him. He's not a hardened criminal. He's scared. He's desperate. And I think we can handle this differently." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "He committed a robbery. That's a crime." "I understand," James replied, his tone respectful but firm. "But hear me out. He gave the purse back voluntarily. He didn't hurt the woman. He panicked. Look at him. Does this look like someone who's beyond saving?" The officers exchanged a glance, their professionalism softened by the sincerity in James's voice. The younger officer stepped forward, addressing the young man directly. "Is that true?" he asked. "Did you give the purse back willingly?" The young man nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what else to do. He talked to me, made me realize it wasn't worth it." The older officer sighed, his expression softening. "All right, we'll take this one step at a time, but we're going to need to run his information and file a report." James nodded in agreement. "Fair enough, but I'll vouch for him. I'm willing to help him turn his life around." The young man looked up sharply, his face a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. "You'd do that? For me?" James turned to him, his expression kind but firm. "Yes, but you have to meet me halfway. No more running, no more excuses. You have to want this." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes, but he nodded fervently. "I do. I swear, I do." The officers, sensing the shift in the situation, chose a more measured approach. Instead of cuffs, they asked the young man to sit in the back of the squad car while they sorted out the details. James promised he would be there every step of the way, and his word seemed to carry a weight that reassured everyone involved. Later that evening, James met with Mary, who had been checked over by paramedics and cleared to go home. Her knees were bandaged, but her spirit seemed unbroken. "Did you catch him?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly with lingering fear. "We did," James said, handing her the purse. "And he gave this back. Voluntarily." Mary's hands trembled as she took the purse, her emotions catching in her throat. "Why would he?" James smiled softly. "Because sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. I saw something in him, Mary. He's young, scared, and lost, but I think he's got a chance to change." Mary's expression softened, her anger melting into something closer to compassion. "Do you really think he can turn things around?" "I do," James replied. "But it won't be easy for him. That's why I'm going to help. He's not alone anymore." Mary nodded slowly, a small smile creeping onto her lips. "Well, if he's willing to change, then I suppose I can find it in me to forgive him." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. James worked tirelessly to connect the young man, whose name was Marcus, with local resources. He found a community program that offered job training and counseling for at-risk youth. Marcus was hesitant at first, unsure if he deserved a second chance, but James's unwavering support kept him going. One afternoon, Marcus stood outside the community center holding a certificate of completion from the program. Mary and James were there, applauding as he stepped off the stage. "You did it," James said, clapping a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus looked down at the certificate, his eyes brimming with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Both of you." Mary smiled warmly. "You've proven that you're more than what happened that day. I'm proud of you." As they stood there together, a small crowd gathered around them. The neighborhood, once shocked by the events of that day, now saw something extraordinary. A story of redemption, of kindness, of second chances. James looked at Marcus and said, "This is just the beginning. You've got a whole life ahead of you. Make it count." Marcus nodded, determination shining in his eyes. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he had a new family of supporters standing beside him. The lesson was clear. Even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found when we choose to believe in each other. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Months had passed since that fateful day, and the neighborhood seemed brighter, as if the events had sparked a ripple effect of positivity. The once overgrown lot behind the community center had been transformed into a thriving garden, a space where neighbors could gather and children could play. It was here that James, Mary, and Marcus now spent their Saturday mornings working side by side to tend to the plants, each stroke of the hoe and each seed planted symbolizing new beginnings. Marcus knelt in the soil, his hands dirty but steady, planting a row of tomatoes with careful precision. He had come a long way from the frightened young man James had confronted in that alley. His confidence had grown, along with his sense of purpose. He no longer looked over his shoulder or avoided eye contact. Now he greeted everyone with a smile, his eyes bright with hope. "I didn't think I'd ever feel like I belonged anywhere," Marcus said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence of their work. He glanced at James, who was repairing a wooden trellis nearby. "But this feels like home." James paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and smiled at Marcus. "That's because you put in the work, Marcus. You made the choice to turn things around. All I did was give you a push in the right direction." Mary, who was watering a patch of flowers nearby, looked up and added, "Don't sell yourself short, James. You didn't just give him a push, you gave him hope when no one else did. And that's something not everyone would have done." Marcus nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "You know, I used to think the world was against me, that no one cared if I disappeared, that I didn't matter. But you showed me that wasn't true. You gave me a chance, and I want to do that for someone else someday." The sincerity in Marcus's voice struck a chord in James and Mary. It was a reminder of why they had fought so hard to help him, and it reaffirmed their belief in the power of second chances. As the day went on, more neighbors began to arrive at the garden. Some came to help, others just to chat and enjoy the warm sunshine. A small group of children ran past, laughing and chasing each other around the rows of vegetables. Mary watched them with a smile, her heart full. One of the younger boys stopped near Marcus, staring up at him with wide eyes. "Are you the guy who fixed the garden?" the boy asked, clutching a tiny watering can. Marcus chuckled, glancing at James and Mary before responding. "I helped, but it was a team effort. You want to learn how to plant something?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Marcus showed him how to dig a small hole and gently place a seed inside. The boy's face lit up with excitement as he covered the seed with soil, his small hands patting it down carefully. Watching the interaction, James felt a swell of pride. Marcus wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, and now he was becoming a source of inspiration for others. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, the three of them sat on a bench overlooking the garden. The air was filled with the hum of bees and the soft murmur of neighbors chatting in the background. "You know," Mary said, breaking the peaceful silence, "I used to think people couldn't change, that once someone made a mistake, it defined them forever. But you've proved me wrong, Marcus. You've shown me that everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story." Marcus smiled at her, his voice filled with gratitude. "I wouldn't have had the chance to rewrite mine if you hadn't forgiven me. That means more to me than you'll ever know." James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's easy to hold on to anger, to let fear or resentment take over. But what you two did, what we all did together, proves that compassion and understanding are stronger. When we choose to believe in each other, incredible things can happen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the garden seemed to glow with a quiet magic. It was a place that had been born out of chaos, but transformed into a beacon of hope, a symbol of what was possible when people came together with open hearts. In the weeks that followed, the garden became more than just a community project. It became a sanctuary for everyone in the neighborhood. Marcus took on a leadership role, organizing events and mentoring other young people who were struggling to find their way. He often shared his story, not with shame, but with pride in how far he'd come. One evening, Marcus stood before a small crowd gathered at the garden's edge. He held a microphone in one hand, his voice steady as he spoke. "I used to think I was invisible, that nothing I did mattered, but I was wrong. What I've learned is that every single one of us has the power to change, not just our own lives, but the lives of others. If you're willing to give someone a chance, to believe in them, you can spark something incredible. That's what happened to me, and I'll never forget it." The crowd erupted in applause, and as Marcus stepped down, James and Mary were there waiting for him, their faces beaming with pride. This story reminds us all that it's never too late to choose kindness, to believe in the power of second chances, and to take the leap to make a real difference in someone's life. It shows us that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, when anger or judgment might seem like the easiest response, choosing understanding and compassion can lead to incredible transformation. Every small act of kindness has a ripple effect. It can inspire someone who feels invisible to believe they matter. It can guide someone who's lost onto a path they never thought possible. And it can remind us all of the humanity we share, even in the most unexpected circumstances. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the good that exists even in the darkest times, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. By sharing stories like these, you're helping to spread a message of hope and resilience. You never know who might need to hear this today, who might be looking for a sign that they too can be forgiven, that they can start over, that someone cares. Together, we can create a world filled with empathy, hope, and the belief that no one is beyond redemption. So let's make this our mission, to lift each other up, to give second chances, and to choose kindness every single day. Share this story, and let's keep building a brighter, more compassionate world, one act of kindness at a time.